All right, so when we talk about end behavior of a graph, we're talking it in terms of x. So as x approaches infinity or negative infinity, and then what does y reflect? So when I talk about end behavior, I would write it as x approaches positive infinity. How does my f of x, aka y, going to look like? And as x approaches negative infinity, what is my y going to look like as I keep going to the left? So if I have this graph drawn right here, and I want to look at as, say, for example, my x going all the way to negative, or sorry, positive infinity. If I'm looking towards a positive infinity and I want to follow my graph kind of just, no matter what, keeps going up this way. So if I look at my f of x, aka my y values, they're going to just keep going up, right? So they're going to keep going positive infinity as my graph to the x goes to positive infinity. So I would write f of x then approaches positive infinity. If I look at my graph and I say, okay, well, let's start following and going to the left, the more I go to the left, the more I go towards negative infinity, my graph is going down this way, down into y values, but now my y values are going to negative infinity. So as I keep going to the left in my x values, then my graph keeps going down into my y values, which would be negative infinity. So as x approaches negative infinity, my f of x approaches negative infinity. And that's all you're doing for end behavior. End behavior is looking at how the graph is ending. Where is it going to end up? And so the first instinct you want to move again is right or left of your x, and then just see how your graph is either going up, down, maybe it's going to one number. So for another example, I have for this graph, and I can say as x, we'll look at as it approaches infinity, where does f of x go? And then as x, and so you know this approaching is this little arrow means to approach. All right, so that's how I write it. So as x approaches negative infinity, where does f of x go? So if I'm looking at this graph and I say, okay, well, first let's start off at, I'm going to positive infinity. Where is my graph going? Well, my graph is going up the more I go right. So that means that my f of x is going to approach infinity, because the more I go up, I'm going to approach infinity of my y-axis as I approach infinity of my x-axis. Now, as I approach, say, negative infinity on my x-axis, as I approach towards the left direction, my graph is still going up. It's still going up towards positive infinity of my y, right? Because I keep going up, I keep reaching all of my y positive infinity values. So that just means that as x approaches negative infinity, f of x approaches positive infinity. Now, what if I have a graph and say it looks something like this? Okay, so I have a graph that looks something like this, where it kind of converges to seemingly a line almost. And I say, okay, well, what's the end behavior of this? So I want to, again, look at as my x approaches infinity, so as it's always going to the right, what is my f of x going to look like? And as my x approaches negative infinity, as it goes to the left, what is my f of x or my y values going to look like? So first, let's start off as I go to positive infinity, which is this way. As I go right, I see that my graph is going right as well, but it converges to one value on the y. And that value is it verges onto y equals 1, right? So it converges to this line, and it gets closer and closer, but it will never actually reach 1. It's a horizontal asymptote. So my f of x approaches 1. So then as it goes right, my y reaches 1. And then, all right, let's look as my x approaches left. So as it approaches what we call negative infinity, remember this is positive infinity on the right, so negative infinity on the left. My graph, as I go left, my graph just keeps going up. And so as it goes up, it's going to reach a positive infinity of my y. So I would say f of x reaches positive infinity or approaches positive infinity as x approaches negative infinity. So this is end behavior. End behavior can either go to a positive or negative infinity, or it's going to go to some constant that's a number if it merges to that number, as in this example.